We are now. Thank you, Taylor. Um, well, before we start, since it was spring break, did anyone have, this is just more of a fun thing. Did anyone have anything cool, fun, or exciting happen over spring break? I know a few students here that meet in person were on a trip in Georgia. That must have been pretty fun. Anything neat happen to anyone that they want to share? Well, I'll share what I did over spring break. I did a lot of different, actually, I did a lot of stuff. Most of it wasn't very, I wouldn't say very exciting. I did reconnect with my brother-in-law, who I haven't really done anything with for about a decade, and that was kind of nice. Um, and we went fishing, and I caught a big walleye, caught a small muskie, which is really cool. If any of you fish, you know that's quite the task. And a small channel catfish and a pretty big uh, buffalo. So if you don't know, a buffalo is a fish that looks like a carp. Just it's not like an actual buffalo. So that was probably the most exciting thing I did over spring break. Annabeth.
So I think Cleo already told you about this, but I stayed here over spring break helping with the zoo science animal care over spring break. And I heard a American woodcock outside of our house and I got really excited. Probably a little
Yeah.
bit too excited. I literally texted all of my family and I'm like, there's a paint outside. Um my my brother's girlfriend was really excited about that because she loves birds. But yeah, that was super exciting. And I think that's probably the most exciting thing that happened, other than the power going out at the AC, but that's a different type of
Oh,
exciting. That is
yeah.
a,
Bad exciting. I
yeah.
actually, Cleo sent me the recording that you sent Cleo of the woodcock, and then I couldn't make it down that night, but I came down the next night and I stood out there for about maybe 25 minutes behind your house like a weirdo. Uh,
Yeah, wait, what? I did not see you. That's okay.
it was dark.
I was asleep
Uh,
probably.
I was back in that like gravel
Oh,
lot
okay, that
behind the
okay,
house there.
gotcha.
Yeah, not literally in your backyard, but I didn't hear him. I even turned on my phone and tried to play a call to see if I could get it to respond to a call,
Oh,
and
he's gone. Probably got too cold. It was really cold the next night.
yeah, it was. It sucked. I went out there and I was freezing. But I really wanted to see the woodcock. Cleo?
I just wanted to show off my cool new tattoos.
Yeah.
That's what I did over break. They're pretty sick. Pretty excited.
Some sick new tattoos. All right. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share? Anything cool happen at your zoo or anything? Your workplace? All right. That's okay. Yeah, Bjorn.
I upgraded all those baby tarantulas. That was really fun.
Oh, did you? You gave them
Yeah,
like
they're doing
bigger
awesome.
enclosures?
Yeah, they're all growing in the Darth Maul. His colors are just starting to come in. He's just big enough where he's starting to get that red black. But yeah, that was fun. I got to finally set up some like arboreal stuff for him. So that was a fun adventure for me.
That's really cool. Heck yeah. All right, Tiffany.
I have a funny story. Unfortunately, it was my day off, so I didn't even get to participate. Um, we have two skunks that live together in a mew. Um, and thankfully it's footed, but my curator was covering my section and she could have sworn one of the skunks got under the enclosure until they accounted for both of our skunks. So a wild skunk had actually gotten under their habitat. Thankfully didn't spray anywhere, but they were like, he got stuck under the footing. So then they had to dig him out, not get sprayed in the process. They were doing that, didn't have time to fill it in. My curator had just sat down for lunch and we got a surprise USDA inspection. So she's like,
Oh,
we did very well. It was fine. Nothing happened. But they're just like, oh my gosh, we were trying to trap this wild skunk. We haven't caught him yet. We know where he's nested. The only thing we've caught so far is a very naive juvenile raccoon. who was too scared to come back out of the trap. So maintenance was like kind of there trying to like poke him out because they needed the trap for the skunk, not for the raccoon. Um, but yeah, I just get a picture sent to me in the morning, being like a picture of a skunk being that's not Kix or Flower. And we're just like, oh my God. So that was fun. And then we've
That's
just been
cool.
having strange weather here in northern New York. So
Here in West Virginia as well. Class was canceled today after I was all of spring break. I was fishing in a t-shirt, and today class was canceled because the roads were covered in ice. And I have scraped my window 3 times today, so
nice.
it made me sad. Ryan.
Yeah, so I didn't really do anything over spring break. I worked a lot. Actually worked some overtime because monkeys be doing monkey things. Um, and I guess it's just kind of happened, kind of cool. Four of our juvenile primates that are rescues, they all of them crated for the first time at the same time. We have four crates and they all stationed in their crates, and it was a lovely little thing they did. But during my spring break, when I was working and or wasn't working but was like doing schoolwork and stuff, we had a couple nice days. I'm in Nebraska. Um, and around my apartment, we have a lot of just different types of birds, and I'm not much of a bird person, not gonna lie. Not that I don't like them, I just don't know a whole too lot about them. So I wondered
Sure.
if anyone had like an app or a specific book or something that I could use to identify. Because we have like woodpeckers, I saw a bunch of different types, like finches, I think, but I would love a recommendation so I can sit outside more.
Sure, yeah. For me, I mean, if have you tried Merlin before, Ryan?
I haven't honestly tried
No.
anything before. I just
So
birds exist.
Well, if you install the Merlin app on your phone, and what you can do is it's got like a little green button on it you push, and it starts listening to the birds around you, and then it sends the audio to a server that's got AI that then looks at the signature of the sound, the sonogram, and then it identifies the bird for you. So that's really
If it
cool.
has like a bunch of birds at the same time, like will it be able to like pinpoint some of them?
Yeah, yeah. The only thing that it struggles if your phone, if the speaker area gets like full of fluff or whatever from being in your pocket a lot, like it'll have a little bit of difficulty hearing, or if you're like by a busy highway or something like that. But otherwise, that's really, really nice, and it's a good way to like you start to learn some of the bird calls by using that, so that's nice. For books, uh, there's a lot. I mean, my gosh, there's a lot of field guides to birds out there. You probably have some state-specific books that might be nice, and I don't know for Nebraska what. I'm sure we could Google like "Birds of Nebraska" book, and and probably find something. But I have I don't live there, so I haven't tried that out. Uh, but like a general like Sibley field guide would be a good starting point. That's my favorite field guide. Um, but any of the major field like Peterson Field Guide or something like that would also be suitable. There's Peterson, Kaufman, Audubon. There's a lot. So, but that'd be my recommendation. If you want to spend a bunch of money, my absolute favorite guide is an app that's also a field guide, but it's expensive. It's like $60 a year. So you got to be pretty into the birds before you drop money on that. It's called iBird, and it uh it has like all the field guide stuff. It has actual pictures along with the like drawings, or the paintings of birds, however you want to say that. And it has their audio files on the same page with the bird, so you can click in and play the audio files, listen to them, and confirm that what you're hearing is what you think it is. I really like that, but $60 a year. So
That's cool. I don't know if any of you guys have heard about it. My coworkers at work have started doing the Birdle every day. Is anyone else? Okay, it's like a Wordle. You have to figure out what the bird is every single day, and my coworkers are obsessed.
is this
But
birdie game?
it's what?
Is it called Birdle or Birdie game?
Birdle. I
So there's
thought
a
it was called Birdle. It might be called Birdie Game. I could be completely, they call it Birdle. So
there's a game. I have to see if there's a Birdle as well, if it's separate. There's a game called Birdie Game, and so I have a Discord server where the students that are into birds kind of hang out and do stuff. And there's a section where just people play Birdie Game and post their results in the Discord every day. And it's like that. It's like you get like a picture of a bird, but it's zoomed really far in, so you can just see like a small section of bird. And then there's an audio file that you can play, but it only plays a little tiny snippet, like the first quarter second of the sound. And then you get a guess. You always get it wrong the first time, unless you're incredibly lucky. And then, it keeps revealing a little bit more of the picture or a little bit more of the sound until you have like six guesses to figure out what it is. It works a lot like Wordle. So. But now I have to check and see if there's Birdle too. Maybe we can have the Birdie Game channel and the Birdle channel. That's cool. Okay. Let's jump into our stuff for the night. I can't remember how long this one is. I don't think it's that. Well, it's not too bad. It doesn't seem that long. I think the latter half. So we get into now a lot of places where we're going to start to see similar sorts of conversation points come up, and you might have noticed that as you were answering some of the questions. Um, then that's not necessarily a bad thing because we can maybe start to look at them from um, more well-reasoned angles because we've all talked about some of this stuff now. We have some better ideas about some of these things. Um, and then there's still new stuff in the chapters as well. The rest of the semesters, I would say, kind of like that, where in every chapter, you're like, oh man, that draws back on that theme from that previous chapter in the first half of the semester, and so you get some connections across time that way. The first question is, what are the two major challenges? This is from Arkham Beyond 15 and 16. This will be chapter 15. Two major challenges being faced by modern zoos, according to the author. Jasmine Anderson, ready to go.
For this one, I put that the cultural shift was the first one, and the cultural shift challenge was the first one where zoos and aquariums are tasked with meeting the needs of their audience and the fate of rapid worldwide socioeconomic and demographic changes and of personal detachment from nature owing to increasing urbanization, and that the second challenge is the relevancy challenge, which is the original Victorian premise that zoos presented the wonders of the world to an audience with limited access to information, looks perilously outdated.
Good. Um, so what do you guys think about those two challenges? The first challenge, I would think you should have a fairly strong set of thoughts about now. I would hope so. Well, because that's very much so tied into what you just wrote a hopefully 12-page long paper about. Um, so what are your thoughts about these two challenges? Do you think these are the big challenges? Do you agree with the author these are the big challenges? Do you think there's a certain part of these two challenges that is more important for zoos to address? Um, Tiffany.
I thought the relevancy challenge was probably the one that zoos are having a harder time kind of keeping because yeah, we're still trying to remain entertaining, but if our premise is that we want to provide information that people couldn't get otherwise, that's not really true at this point. Everyone's so connected to everything. I even, when someone asks me a question at a keeper chat or something, I'll just whip out my phone if I don't know it and be like, let's look it up. Um, and you can literally find peer-reviewed articles on your phone. It's not even just some
Mhm.
random person writing a website that they think this is cool information. Um, so staying relevant in that aspect, I feel is like something that we'll constantly be trying to work at, and finding new ways to keep ourselves relevant, which I think is why you see so many facilities having social media, and posting so much on social media, even if it's not necessarily educational, even if it's just a funny video of their animals doing stuff. Um, the cultural shift, I think, it, it took a lot longer for that to become a challenge, where I feel like the relevancy challenge became a problem a lot more rapidly, because becoming connected happened fairly rapidly over history, where cultural shifts tend to take a little bit more time. So we've been constantly shifting through culture, so we're just kind of steadily going with that as we need to. But the information age is rapid, so I feel like we're having a harder time facing that challenge than the cultural shift.
Good answer. Um, so you're talking about the issues that the internet brings to zoo relevancy, and that because information is so incredibly readily available, and yeah, just like you, if I have a question, I just pick up my phone and I answer the question. Um, and since zoos have been perceived as sort of a way to expose people to different uh, well, different animals throughout the world and conservation issues throughout the world, that is very accessible on your phone. How how do zoos overcome that? I don't really, well, maybe you disagree. I don't think social media posts overcome that particular issue. It does at least ingrain them in internet culture. Uh, that's not to say that maybe I'm wrong. But I don't think that, I don't know. What do you think, Annabeth?
Actually, I had a couple questions for both you and Tiffany.
Sure.
Um, are we, so we're saying that access to internet and information is a detriment because people do not go to zoos for information? Is that
Yeah, so
what? Okay.
the idea is historically zoos have been a source of worldly knowledge when it comes to animals, at least. And like historically, if even when I was a kid, if I wanted to see what a lion looked like, I was pretty restricted in how I might access that type of information. I might go to the library and get a children's book on animals or something like that, which of course you could do. But otherwise, the only way that was
That,
happening was the
okay,
zoo.
good. Okay, I was a bit confused because I think the way that my mind was interpreting that was that zoos were the place to get information on animals. And I think that that is true, but I think that if you're going to a zoo, you're probably going to look at an animal and then as a byproduct to get information on that animal. And if you wanted to specifically, like if you wanted to learn more about, I don't know, meerkats or something that came out of my head, I feel like it would probably be more beneficial to go to a library, like you said, librarian. Um, but yeah, that is just I just need clarification on that, but gotcha.
Okay. You in 1 second. Taylor, you had your hand raised. You took it down. I feel like it's the second I said social media. I want to hear your opinion, even if it's not the same thought that I had.
I think when you started talking, it kind of like veered off, and maybe what I was saying wasn't quite as relevant anymore. But I was just kind of thinking, like, in terms of the relevancy thing, I think when I go to a zoo and maybe like I come across an animal that I'm not necessarily like exposed to, otherwise, it like encourages me to look more into that. So I think that like the technology and like the information resources that we have are great, but if you don't think of that animal, like you're not going to research it or like look more into it. So I think that zoos present like an opportunity to like the initial exposure, and maybe like they don't have all the information or like answer all the questions that you want. So you have the opportunity to use like your phone or like your computer to look more into that. But like there's some species that I would just have never, have known about if I hadn't gone to the zoo in the first place.
Yeah, that's a great point. Um, you can't look up something you've never heard of before, right? I mean, I've been at the zoo and seen things. I was like, oh, I didn't know that was even an animal. Now and definitely pulled out my phone right there and looked it up. So absolutely, Bjorn.
I think you guys actually made a great segue into what I was going to say because you were kind of touching on an issue that I think is very much within the relevancy challenge that just absolutely drives me nuts. And it's not necessarily the relevancy for zoos, but it's more so the relevancy for educators because I've had it so often where people do go to the zoo, they see species, and then they pull up their phone and start like looking up facts, or they're going through the entire zoo with their phone just like this. And so they start, like looking up facts, looking up information, and then I'll like approach them and be like, "Hey guys, like, do you have any questions or anything?" And they don't want anything to do with me. They're just like, "No, like we're fine." And so my role as an educator then has been kind of completely eliminated because they are getting their information from the media as they are at the zoo looking at the animals. So I think that is a really weird aspect as well that really impacts the need for educators.
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, it's a little bit of a It kind of reminds me of all the discussion of AI taking people's jobs kind of thing where it's not quite the same, but yeah, I think the difference, and this is becoming harder and harder to find in people, but the difference is the having human interactions is very valuable as opposed to staring at your phone. Um, really communicating with each other is much more beneficial than looking at the Wikipedia page. Um, and that benefit goes beyond the information in a Wikipedia page, right? So, um, it's a shame that there are people that have become so ingrained in their use of technology that they might shy away from that kind of human interaction. Uh, but there's still a need for it, I think. Annabeth?
Can I pick our brains just for a second?
Sure.
So I'm not against human interaction. I love humans. I am one. It's pretty cool.
Uh,
Um, and I understand Bjorn's grievances because it can be difficult if you're an educator and then people do not want to interact with you and it does put you down. But playing devil's advocate here just a little bit.
I
If
love
they
that.
are still getting the information, does it matter? If they are still going out of their way to get more information on an animal, which would promote a pro-environmental behavior, like they talked about in that chapter, does it matter where they're getting that information from?
Caitlin has something she wants to say. All right, Caitlin.
I was just gonna say that I think it can be beneficial that like they're getting that information on their own, they're seeking it out on their own, so there's clearly an interest there. I think where it can get tricky is what source are they getting that information from, which you can't control. Like that's something outside of your hands. Maybe they're getting great information. Maybe they are looking at a peer-reviewed journal like we talked about a little bit earlier. That could be what they're looking at, but they could also be on like a random TikTok page that doesn't even have factual information, but is maybe very like interest worthy. Like people are watching it and it's getting a lot of views. So then it's becoming more popular when you search for that thing. So I think that's where it can be really tricky in that like you don't know where they're sourcing this information from. Whereas like if they're talking to Bjorn right there, he probably has accurate information and experience that can really connect with people in a way that maybe the information they're finding on their phone can't.
Yeah, this is making me want to get up on a soapbox and talk about misinformation. I'm gonna try to quell the urge. Cleo, you raised your hand. You have to talk.
I was kind of going to say the same thing. Like, there's a lot of false information out there, and zookeepers probably have the most updated stuff, hopefully, the most updated research. And also talking to somebody, if they're super excited about it, you're more than likely to get super excited about it. So that's just not just looking at your phone, you're reading other people's body language and getting excited too.
We'll talk just slightly about misinformation. Uh, so you're all educated and becoming more educated. That's why you're here. Do you find it frustrating when that happens? Bjorn, is that frustrating when that happens? When someone's just like, yeah, this is what this animal does. I know it. And maybe it's wrong. Do you find that frustrating? You don't care. Okay. Bjorn doesn't care. Okay. I care.
Well, I was gonna say like it. Yes, I mean it's inherently very, very frustrating, especially if I'm there like talking to people and I think especially in the snake world, there's so many myths and so many legends and so many my grandpappy said stories. Um, sorry, let me turn off this alarm. So I mean that is very, very frustrating, but it's one of those things where it's like I have a tough time dwelling on that because I'll kind of just go down the rabbit hole because it happens so consistently, at least in my experience with snakes. So, look on the bright side. There are also a lot of people who are very, very excited to interact with me. A lot of people who um, are very, very open to having like conversations and open to learning information. And I think that is something that I really like to focus on because I think culturally that's how I'm going to have the biggest impact, not necessarily focusing on the people who are locking in on that, misinformation, but doing my best to, really talk to the people and, push my passion and my information forth on those who are open to actually hearing it. I don't know if that made sense at all, but
It made sense. It made total sense. So there are multiple. So hold on. I need to write this down. Um, oh, Jasmine. Oh, wait, I just have a bunch of different things I want to talk about here. Um, Jasmine, go ahead.
I was just going to say that it's interesting hearing everyone's view on this, especially having to deal with misinformation at zoos. Our facility, it's a little bit different. One, we don't have any service up there, so it's about harder for people to try to find information online about stuff or they usually will go to us as keepers or tour guides. But our facility, we don't have signage, so almost all of the things that we do there is tour based. So you have a tour guide walk you around the lower compound, and then we have a 2 hour drive around the different like the different enclosures, which are up to 100 acres for some of them. So I was just gonna say it's really interesting hearing it because at our facility we don't really deal with this as much.
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder if not having any signage has something to do with that. Like if you're seeing an animal for the first time and you don't know what it's called and there's no sign, then you have to ask somebody, what's this animal, right? Like you have to ask somebody. Uh, that's interesting. Ryan.
Yeah, that just reminded me. I work with Malayan tapers, and we do have signage that clearly says Malayan taper, but it's a little bit further down the exhibit. It's a very large exhibit. And I cringe every single time I hear someone call them an anteater or an armadillo. I saw grown adults even. These aren't children. And like they call them armadillos. And I just have to giggle a little bit. And I also have to realize like, hey, these people don't know what this is and maybe don't know animals, but the when people call animals the wrong thing, it's a major ick of mine, and I hear it all the time. Also with like primates, when people call monkeys apes or apes monkeys. Ugh. Anyway, I just want to throw that in there.
Ryan, that cracks me up. I knew a soil scientist that got extremely mad at me because I called soil dirt once. Um, and it's funny because I'm trained as an entomologist, in my PhD, and I remember she called something that was most definitely not a hemipteran a bug. And I was like, no, you can't be picky with soil and dirt if you're not going to use my terms right too. So I understand. where you're coming from with that. I think with that, it's important to remember that everyone is educated within their particular discipline, and once soon as you step outside of that, and you're outside your comfort zone, yeah, you're going to start throwing some wrong terms around. It's going to happen, and if you can take that like nice feedback, constructive feedback, and go, oh, I didn't know that, and then incorporate it into your language, then you've learned something. Tiffany.
I just want to make everyone feel maybe better, maybe worse. It's not just exotics. They do that too. It's literally every animal. I only have natives most of the time. It's embarrassing how many people don't know what an elk is. Um, I mean, they call it a deer, which is technically not wrong. Or a reindeer. We only have females and they don't have antlers. So like it's it's not just exotic animals. Sometimes it's the ones that's literally in their backyard. They just don't see them enough. Possums get called rats. I feel so bad for our possums.
Yeah, that's my favorite mammal, so I'm not okay with that. Caitlin.
For the misinformation at zoos, I definitely have encountered a ton of it. I usually do address it, but based on the person's general attitude. So, like, if they seem open to conversation or open to suggestion, I will address it. But if I can kind of tell that they're like closed off, or if I even try to talk to them and they're like a little bit snippy with me, then it kind of feels not worth it to address it because I don't want to sit and argue with them. But I found that most people are pretty open to hearing a different opinion, like from a zookeeper. Not too long ago, I overheard two women talking about how sad it was that the zoo they went to where a polar bear was by itself and how they had read an article about a depressed polar bear. And I was just kind of like, hey, I can't speak to that individual polar bear, but polar bears are solitary. Like they come together to mate, but most of the time they don't want to live with another polar bear, and that might not work out for either bear. So, like, just because it is alone doesn't mean it's a depressing situation. And they were like, oh, I didn't know that. And they were pretty open, but then they did end it with like, but I did read an article about a depressed bear. I was like, okay, that's very possible, but like being having a companion isn't the end all be all of animal happiness. And they were pretty open to it.
That's great. Yeah. I think I think misinformation is this is tangential really to the core relevancy topic, but it is important, is a problem. It's not as much of a problem maybe for some creatures than others. It's not as big of a problem for some topics as others, for zoos in general compared to say medicine. Um, yeah, you think you're frustrated. My brother-in-law, he got his PhD studying viruses during the pandemic, right? He was getting his PhD during the pandemic, and it was a sort of the stars aligned. And he's just like all of us in this room, right? He is a person that was passionate about what he was doing. He studied, he worked hard, he learned about how these things work, and now you've got this pervasive narrative of anti-vaccination nonsense going around. Not to be political, but it's exactly the same thing. He's a person just like you guys that became educated, studied real hard for this, and now there's tons of misinformation that he is like, I don't, how do you fight this when like anyone can get on the internet, right? And just post like vaccines are bad and they have no foundation upon which to support that argument. And they will say that counter to someone who spent 8 years getting a master's and a PhD. Uh, it's like, well, there's your misinformation. Um, Two of you mentioned talking specifically to people willing to listen. And I think this is a challenging thing to think about. Are those the most so there's like a hierarchy, I think. Maybe this is the way to explain this. There are people who are already in your camp that like they're like they have the same knowledge as you. So if it's uh I don't know, conservation of lions or whatever, like they're in they're like, yeah, conservation's good, lions are good. I know about lions. I have no misconceptions about lions. Then there's people who are confused but willing to listen and hear you out. And once they get a knowledge from someone who's actually studied the subject, they're like, oh, okay, that's how that works. That's great. And then there are people who are completely, they're like talking to brick walls, right? I think those might be the most important people to try to work through a problem with, even though they're also the most difficult and frustrating people to try to work through a problem with. When you can convert the brick wall into a bookshelf of knowledge, for example, that's I don't know a better way of putting it. When you can change a person like that, that's a really, I think, a big deal. So I guess I would just suggest that the couple of you that mentioned that, I don't, I get why that's your sort of your philosophy of dealing with people. Um, but it would benefit you and them to find a way to try to bridge the gap. Um, I am just as much to blame for that sort of thing as anyone else. Um, I have some various political differences between my parents and myself. We have very, very different, they're very conservative, and I am not. And so and my mom is like a brick wall, just absolute brick wall. And I try to get through that brick wall and be like, hey, some of these things that you think they're not good. People are being hurt. It's just not a good thing. And this is not a blanket statement about conservatism, by the way. It's very specific things. I just don't want to get into those details. Um, and it's like talking to a brick wall. But I think, made a little progress there. So I have tried really hard to break that wall down. I think that's worth doing because once you break that wall down, I think it's a significant change. Tiffany?
So, I mean, I've talked to plenty of brick walls at a zoo because, especially working with herps, we have dinosaurs to modern reptiles and birds, so evolution was always a heavy topic that we brought up at zoos. And we had a fairly decently sized Amish and Mennonite
Yeah.
uh,
The
people around
chat.
us and fairly religious. So, and they'd come and visit the zoo and we'd welcome them with open arms. And then if they didn't want to listen to my show, they were more than welcome to leave. Um, but I think the one thing about, say, you and your mom that's really important is you have multiple chances to change her viewpoint. I only get one chance a lot of the time to try and better inform this person if they are actually willing to have a conversation with me. And I have had many where we agreed to disagree on some aspects, but we did take each other's viewpoint and we're like, okay, I understand where you're coming from. Your information makes sense based on my viewpoints. I understand why that would be frustrating and things like that. Um, but most of those people aren't either repeat visitors or going to multiple places giving the same information. And I think that's what makes it really hard right now, especially at a zoo aspect, because it's also you paid to get in here, so you don't want to be lectured. So it's kind of how do I not lecture you while also trying to inform you that your information necessarily is wrong, not your opinion, but the information you are basing that opinion off of is incorrect. When I only get that one chance to do it, while
Yep.
I also have a bunch of other people to interact with and animals to take care of. So, I think that's the hardest part that I've come across so as someone who does specialize in zoo education, and being an educator, um, I think that's a lot of the time where I've just not wasted my energy because I'm like, this one instance isn't going to do anything, I'm going to go talk to the person who I have the chance of changing their opinion.
Sure. Yeah, that's kind of like triage for information. I like that, and that's a really good point. Maybe my example, however vague it was, with discussing with my family, isn't perfectly equivalent because I can sit down with my mom more than once. She hasn't ever gotten so mad at me that she's refused to talk to me anymore. So, and continue those conversations. Uh, so that's a very fair point. Bjorn.
I also thought that was a really, really good point. And it's funny thinking back on like when I was doing education a lot consistently every day, I realized that I almost had like these standardized middle grounds just because I would talk to brick walls so often. I would have those compromises to essentially fall back on immediately whenever I would like enter a conversation. So like one of them, if I was doing like an education program or talking to somebody who really didn't like snakes, I would always say it's like, well, I don't expect you to like snakes. I'm not trying to get you to love these animals. I'm at least trying to get you to understand that they have a place in the ecosystem and to respect them a little bit more. And so I feel like having that terminology helped me a little bit with some of those brick walls just to immediately establish like, some kind of middle ground where we could potentially meet each other.
Yeah. And snakes in particular are super, super difficult. Now, I've never done what you're talking about from a zoo educator specifically standpoint, but I have talked to lots of people about snakes, just in terms of well, trying to get random folks not to kill them, for example. I've done that a lot, discussing them maybe more from a conservation perspective. Uh, and yeah, I can't tell you the number of times that even after explaining the benefits of snakes and talking about how they don't want to hurt you and how the chances that you really saw a copperhead in your backyard are extremely low, hilariously low. Uh, that was probably a water snake, all that stuff. Um, you still have people come out and
Cottonmouth,
say,
definitely a cottonmouth.
or cottonmouth, yeah, and the West
Yeah.
Virginia cottonmouth, the rare West Virginia cottonmouth. Um, yeah, uh, yeah, even trying to explain to people like there's only two venomous species in West Virginia. Cottonmouth is not one of those two species, that snake that was rattling its tail wasn't actually a rattlesnake. Snakes will rattle their unrattled tails on dry leaves, and it makes a rattling sound, things like that. Uh, it, at the end of the day, there are some people that no matter what you say are going to be like, I don't care. The only snake, a good snake is a dead snake. And it doesn't matter what you tell them. Um, some of that is, I think, tied to like a hardwired phobia that some people have. And I don't really know where it even comes from. My understanding is, and correct me if anyone knows if I'm wrong, there's been hypotheses about an evolutionary foundation for phobias of some organisms that could be potentially dangerous. Uh, but if you look at the responses of children to those various creatures, they don't show those sorts of responses. And so, more than likely, these are learned behaviors through cultural exposure. Um, and, and and so if we could fix that, that would fix a lot. Yeah, Annabeth.
Yeah, there's this really interesting study that was done with infants and snakes, where they literally just put like I don't remember what type. It was like some sort of python, and they put a bunch of infants around the python, and the babies didn't react to the snake
Mhm.
because that is a learned behavior. And I think that there's only one fear that we have innate in our like nature. I do not remember what I think it's like heights or something. Does Taylor might know.
Yeah, I think I read this study. I think it's loud noises we're afraid of, and then falling, I think we're afraid of as well.
Both reasonable. I hate loud noises. I'm not afraid of them. I just don't like them. Uh, and that's why roller coasters are so exciting. Um, yeah, the study with the babies is interesting. Python is an interesting choice. I feel like some small innocuous colubrid would have been a better choice, but Tiffany.
I think there was a similar study, same idea, where they also did it without mom and with mom. And with mom, if mom had a reaction, babies reacted to mom's reaction.
Mm,
So it wasn't necessarily a reaction to the snake itself or whatever animal it was. They were taking cues from mom. So again, kind of the idea that it's a learned behavior,
yeah,
that they're going based off of whatever social cues they have, which was pretty interesting.
that is so. And it makes me wonder, how do people that grow up in a circumstance where they're around people who are afraid of snakes? And I would be a good example of this. My parents, they would go grab the hoe and chop any snake that came into our house or into the even in the yard, like just cruising by when I was a kid. So how does someone like me who sees that fear come to be someone that goes out and catches snakes because they think it's a good time? You know what I mean? Annabeth.
Is that a rhetorical question, or do you want an answer to that? Because I
I would
have an
love an
answer.
answer.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's an appreciation for the environment and education about how the ecosystem works. Because you, as someone with a PhD, you know that snakes are beneficial for the environment. So even though you grew up seeing this happen, you now know it's not something to be afraid of. Like I grew up, I remember vividly, there was like a neck snake in the basement, and I freaked out because my parents were freaking out. But
yeah,
now I want to pick that ringneck snake up. It's cute. I
yeah.
like it.
Um, so well, I'll let Cleo and Bjorn talk, but I gotta come back to that. Go ahead, Cleo.
I was gonna say, my dad is a firm believer in the only snake that's good is a dead snake, and he still stands on that point, even though I try to change his mind every single time I bring up my snakes. Um, but I grew up afraid of snakes. Uh, Exposure and gaining of knowledge since being at West Liberty in particular has really made me fall in love with snakes and what they do for the ecosystem. I'm still working on my fear of spiders. My mother is terrified of them, and I think I've talked about that before in this class, but that's a work in progress. I've gotten a lot better, but that just innate fear is still deep within me.
Right, Bjorn, go ahead.
I think as like a little kid, especially little little crazy boys, there's something that's very appealing about grabbing an animal that other people are freaked out about. So if you know your mom is gonna like freak out, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna pocket that garter snake and save that for a for a later time. I think there is definitely something to that, and that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of people who grew up in an environment where people are afraid of those snakes actually start to gravitate to them. Which is a very, very funny dynamic, and I'm not sure how often that appears, but I feel like I personally have seen that often. And I definitely also share uh uneasiness with spiders, which is funny because I started this by saying how I just like upgraded my tarantulas. Because I also it's like I grew up in a nature loving family. Like I don't know where I got this like dislike for spiders from, whether it was like cultural or what, but and it wasn't even a dislike, it was just like a lot of uneasiness. And I think a lot of that for me was not being able to read them, not really knowing what's going on. So I ended up just getting tarantula pets, and then I got one from a friend of mine, and then I ended up getting more, and now we have four tarantulas in the closet. But I think that just like having them and learning about them, being able to read them a little better and raising them, that's completely changed my opinion and my comfort level around them.
Yeah. Uh, Tiffany, go ahead. You were next.
I didn't necessarily have snake hating people in my family, but I was the little kid that wanted to poke everything. So I think a
Mm.
lot of it is also just an innate curiosity. I was the one that was tearing things apart and getting in trouble because I couldn't put them back together because I lost screws or something. That if there was a dead bird on the side of the road that we were walking, I wanted to take a stick and see what it looked like on the inside. So I think that comes into a lot of play. I'm still a very curious person. I still want to know how things work. Um, and that's kind of like I'm not a fan of anything that stings, yet I've held uh probably a dumb amount of scorpions. Um, because one, it was my job, and two, I was just like, no, I was curious. Not to get stung, though that did happen. But I think a lot of it, just some kids, irregardless of what their parents or their family around them think, they're either curious about that animal irregardless, or they're curious about what about that animal is making them so scared that they want to figure that out. So there's a lot of questioning in that, and that's kind of how I was as a kid, is I wanted to know more. I didn't want to take whatever I was told at face value, which I see a lot in the kids that I interact with at zoos, is that, yeah, cool, their mom or dad could say something, but they want to know what I, as the person that is taking care of that animal, has to say, because I have a different experience. They want different information.
Great. I have so many notes and things to talk about. Ryan.
Yeah, so this kind of made me think about, I was kind of juggling what I wanted to discuss for this week's discussion, and I almost talked about this. My sister Mason has cerebral palsy, so she's a disabled individual, diplegic, so she can't walk essentially, and that cat hair, oh my God. That comes with a bit of a mental deficit as well. Um, and I always grew up very into animals and the bugs, digging for worms. Like I love snakes, I love spiders. They don't like I'll hunt for them in my apartment. I love them. They're great. Um, but my sister, on the other hand, no matter how many times I tried growing up, she bugs, animals, things that are alive and not human, they just freak her out. She's not a fan. Um, and so that's just kind of something that's always been around. But once I started working at the zoo, going to the zoo more often, I wanted to show the zoo to my family more often. So I would bring Mason. And it's nice because our zoo, while it's very hilly, it is also decently handicap accessible. And I think our education department, because we have a program for employees with disabilities, they've tried to intertwine some of that stuff in their like graphics and just how the zoo is set up. But since I now have taken Mason a couple more times, like her interest in animals has grown, but also her comfort with them has grown. And I think zoos are a good kind of mediator between, I'm scared of this animal versus, oh, I love this animal, because she's able to safely see them from a distance in an environment where she knows that animal's not going to get to me. And I think that allows the zoo to be more of a comfortable place for her to actually learn about something that makes her scared. So I love that. And I think that goes with children as well, with young kids, where, yeah, maybe they grow up in a family who's terrified of snakes or spiders, but they go to a zoo and they see some cool graphics, or they see like maybe some interactive animal encounter, they see other people interacting with it. So I think zoos in general can be a really good source of comfort and information for kind of all the things we're talking about. And then going back to the misinformation thing real quick, I wrote down that I think zoos with like media, I think media should be decreased a little bit, because I do think that takes away from the immersion of being in a zoo. And being disconnected from the social, or not social world, the media, and it's supposed to be a place of community. So you're supposed to be, looking at other people, looking at the environment around you, and really taking all that in. I know we've passed that part, but I wanted to throw that out there. And
Well, no, that's we haven't passed that part. We've meandered in many, many directions here in a really fantastic discussion that I think is actually incredibly valuable. So I'm glad we're having it. If it isn't, I don't know why I have all these notes scribbled down with important things circled. So I want to go back to my childhood for so many reasons. It would be so much easier. God, it was just responsibility free. No. Um, so we were talking about how we pick up these fears and certain responses to things that are maybe irrational by seeing other people's responses. They're learned. And and then well, first off, when I was a kid, and my parents were absolutely snake murdering terrors, spider murdering terror, like they would kill any of that stuff. Um, I would go out and play in the woods and look for that stuff. And if I found a snake, what I never really grabbed a snake when I was a little kid. Mostly because I was told by my parents it'll kill you, you know. That's every snake was venomous to my parents, even like a garter snake. They didn't even know what that was. So I never would have grabbed them when I was young, but I would sit with them, you know what I mean? Or like follow them around and watch them and just be really fascinated by them and curious about them. And that was with a family that was like, kill everything, you know. I would catch spiders in my bare hands. Um, and you know, I think my mom thought I was just a maniac, but and I was always like that. So one of you, I can't remember who, I just have notes everywhere here, said something about like having a sort of innate curiosity. And if it's an innate characteristic of a person that drives them toward uh, a curious perspective of nature, where they are constantly digging and trying to find a little bit more about it or learn more about it, go interact with it. If that's innate, can we still change it in people that don't have that built into their wiring? Like, can we instill that in people? And now, before you answer, hold on. Before you answer, hands up. Woo. Um, I want to pause, take our break right there, so you can go take a break, stretch, and think about that question and what your answer is. And so when we come back, we'll just kick off with that. I don't know how many questions we're going to get to on that sheet tonight, but this is really good stuff. So, all right.
Can you repeat your thought again? Can you repeat the question we're supposed to be?
Yeah, right. So, okay. So if even under, even in when you have the experience as a child of seeing people around you that hate, say, we've been using snakes as an example because it's a very easy example. But you know, have some fear of something that is not reasonable, right? There's not really a reason to fear the vast majority of snakes you would encounter here. Um, so you live and you grow up in that situation, but you still have that curiosity, that was in that willingness to go interact with those creatures and learn about those creatures and go out in nature and hike around in the muck and find those things, right? That might suggest, as I think Tiffany said, somebody said, it's sort of suggests that there's an innate, that is a sort of already built in uh, to some people curiosity about those things or an inquisitiveness about those things um, that overrides experience. Like, yeah, I've seen mom's afraid of snakes. She kills snakes, but like, I don't really care. Something in me drives me, irrespective of what her thoughts are, to go out and experience those things. So it's innate. Does that make sense? Um, if that's the case, and that it's innateness in people that gets them to go out, it's having that as a quality just built into your wiring from the time you're born, uh, that gets people out into nature. Can we change people's perspectives that don't have that innate quality? That's the question. That might have been the wordiest way to answer your question possible, but I think I did it anyways. Uh, Okay. Does it make sense what I'm trying to get at? Okay. All right. So come back at 8:14. Okay, welcome back. All right. Well, we had a question to discuss before I left. So what do we think about that? A bunch of people had their hand raised before I left. Caitlin, we're in a new hour, by the
I
way.
I think that you can change the opinions of the people who are not as innately curious through experiences and especially through group experiences. And I think Ryan's sister was a really good example where she said that like she wasn't as initially interested in animals, but by going to the zoo more, her like comfort level and interest has increased over time. And I think that's a really good example because I think that happens for a lot of people. And I used to do a little bit of education work at my old zoo. And I think a group setting really helps too for people less curious because sometimes, again, with snakes, sometimes I would bring snakes to schools or I would do presentations with snakes. And there were always kids who were afraid, in large part because their families had taught them that, snakes were scary and dangerous and everything else. And all it took was a couple kids that were brave enough to engage with the snake. And then the more fearful ones would kind of get curious and maybe not want to miss out. And then they would engage with the snake too. And I had kids find me 2 years later at the zoo and say, like, hey, you came to my school, you brought this snake. And they even remembered its name. She was a ball python. Her scales kind of looked like they said boo. So we named her Boo. And we would say, like, hey, look, she's not so scary. Like, even though her name's Boo, her name is like on her skin. She's really cute. And we would teach them like cutesy individual things about her, but then other like bigger things about snakes in general. And it really did seem to stick with a lot of kids and it did change their opinion and they did remember it. And I think having other kids that are a little more curious and brave help the less curious ones.
Great, that's a good example. Um, Jasmine Anderson, what do you think?
I was gonna say an example with also my sister. When we were younger, we grew up at a zoo because my great aunt and uncle own it. So every summer we'd go there and we have a large aviary that you could walk through. And she is terrified of birds. Every time the demoiselle cranes would walk up to her, she would freak out, try to leave. We even had chickens for a while, and she hated the chickens, was scared whenever they would come up to you to get food. And we ended up having to brood some in our bedroom because I was the one in charge of it. And she would always be the first one to come home, right, as they would start being able to fly out of the area. Absolutely terrified. But now she has a kid and he loves animals and wildlife. And recently, last week, I took her and my nephew to our facility. We still have demoiselle cranes in our aviary, and we brought some meat and we're feeding birds. And like you could tell that she was still kind of scared of them and had that look in her eyes, but she's trying to foster his own innate curiosity for animals and trying to keep her fears in check and is starting to be more comfortable around them, which I think is pretty cool.
That's really cool. Motherly love can overcome fear. I love that. That's great. Ryan.
So I guess I had a little bit different of an answer to this question. I think a big factor of people, choosing to go interact with wildlife or not, choosing to go outside and be a part of nature or not, is their own personal motivators. Like, what motivates you to get up in the morning and go do blah, blah, blah? Like, why do you go to work? What motivates you to go to work? Or, for instance, the gym. Why do you go to the gym? You want to be healthier. You want to healthier mind, healthier body, or whatever. So I think that if zoos can focus on what is motivating their public that or the communities that aren't as interested in nature, for instance, if say your motivator is you want to be healthier, like for your own body, what are like calls to action? Something I wrote about is what are calls to action. For you, like how can you then, do something that both benefits your motivator, but also intertwines you with nature a little bit more. And I think zoos can do a lot of that, also tying that into conservation. But I think for those communities, if you can pinpoint like what interests them, what do they want to do, and how can I relate that to nature, I think you might be able to bring in a lot of people. Mental health could be a really big one for that. Like just nature, and all the studies on the effects of nature on mental health. I think if we made that more apparent to people, then maybe they would want to interact with nature more often.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that last point up particularly. My wife is also a professor, and she teaches online now, but we used to teach at a different school together in-person classes. And she actually taught a class about um, going out into nature, and it literally was all about being in nature and how that affects your mental health and how that can uh, give you much greater success as a student or in whatever else you're trying to do. So I think that's a great point. And if you can connect that to zoos, it's a way to hit at least one of the motivators, as you put it, that people might have to make them want to get out and interact with this stuff. Really, that's a really good point. Tiffany.
One of the first things I actually thought of was a lot of the conservation work they've done with snow leopards. And the point of like these people that are taught to hate these animals and want to kill these animals, all the work they've done to change their opinions of not just children, but these generational people that are caring for their livestock and things like that, being taught how to coexist with these animals, and that's such can be such a hard thing to do, but they're kind of proof that just because you aren't innately curious about these animals and you've been taught like in your bones that these are not good for you, that they're only going to harm you, they're going to ruin your livelihood, they're going to run you out of the land, things like that, that there is ways to give them a different viewpoint and really change how they were taught to think about these animals or other organisms, the habitat they're living in, that it's not one or the other. You can have both. And snow leopard was just the one that I remembered off the top of my head because I've seen a lot about the stuff they've done with the local people, especially in Nepal.
Yeah.
Um, but it's like predator proofing and things like that, that it's been very useful and very helpful. So even outside of a zoo aspect, like me working with native animals, um, kind of saying like, hey, possums look gross, but they're not, and kind of we can coexist with them. They're not a problem, and things like that. There's a really big messaging in that, that a lot of people have kind of figured out the equation of how to make it stick without being condescending.
Yeah. Um, Anyone who thinks possums look gross has just not looked close enough. They've certainly never seen a baby possum. I'm just saying. There are very few things cuter than that on this planet. Um, so I have two different thoughts that come from your thoughts, everybody's thoughts here. Um, Actually, three. So the first is, so I feel like we talked about this sort of being an intrinsic property of some people. Could it be that everyone actually has that intrinsic property? It's in there. The wiring's already there. Okay, this is hypothetical. Okay, the wiring's there, and that it requires an experience to really get kicked off, and that some people have had that experience, and that drives them, uh, drives their curiosity. And other people, it's like a spark hasn't been lit yet. And if you give them the right experience, you can turn that wiring on. Does that make sense, Bjorn?
I think that's totally true. And I feel like I've seen that also a lot work at the reptile zoo. Because it's mostly like I've said many times, it's just snakes. So when you're going through the exhibits, like if you love snakes, if you really do like snakes, it's very, very cool. But a lot of people just kind of go through that exhibit and just see like snake after snake after snake after snake. And oftentimes it really does take someone to actually come in and start like talking to the people and engaging them and being like, oh, this is why this snake is cool, or like this is why this snake is cool, or this is why this one room has so much biodiversity of unique adaptations and niche partitioning that make like all of these snakes so incredible kind of within the world. Like we had one snake in Atractaspis, it was a stiletto snake, and everybody always walked by that snake. They always walk by it. And I get it because it just looks like a boring black snake, but that snake is so cool. So it's like once you start telling people about them and kind of giving some information that's not just readily seen by the visuals of the snake. I feel like doing that can really kind of spark some interest and really help to engage people.
I said real quick, Bjorn, because I'm trying. So I haven't taught herpetology for like 6 years, and is the stiletto snake the one where they have the thing that sticks out the side of the mouth and they do this like
Yeah,
side jab? Yeah,
yeah.
those are really, really cool snakes. They're so cool.
They look like worms. They look like big worms. So everyone
Yeah,
sees them and it's just like I'm like, no, you don't understand.
yes, they're extremely cool. Uh, yeah, that's so you're saying that you think that maybe people do sort of have that we're calling it wiring. I don't care what we really call it, but like there's like this dormant thing that's sitting in some people and it's active in other people, and like you can use the proper experience to kick that on. That's kind of what I'm suggesting might be a truth.
Yeah, and I will say one more quick thing. Like I think that's by, providing information that, they might not have, but I think that enthusiasm is also completely contagious. So if you go there and you're excited about it and you're like talking about these things, I think that's something that can very, very quickly rub off on people and people can kind of pick that up. Even just like a small amount will kind of pique their curiosity a little bit.
Cleo.
I had that experience of piquing curiosity. I think it was the first day that I was working as a grad here on campus. Uh, Miss Mort, who's the manager for animal care here, uh, I didn't know anything about Pituophis as a genus or anything like that, and I got to hear a black pine snake absolutely throwing a fit. And
Hmm.
I thought that was the coolest thing ever. I was so scared at first, and I don't know, ever since that, he's one of my favorites just because of his like behaviors. And that was my first like snake experience that I can remember as an adult. And it just really, as soon as I started learning about them, I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. And that just sparked my curiosity for snakes in particular.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, Taylor. There you go.
Is it good? Okay. So I was like pressing it and it wasn't working. I feel like I have seen that spark in people, but I've also seen it go out really quickly. Like I don't know, maybe they're just humoring me. I don't have any family members or really any friends that are interested in animals in the way that I am. And growing up, like I did my best to like encourage my parents to be interested in it and things like that. And they would, they would listen, maybe ask a question or two. But I mean, like I've been trying like my whole life to get them, to be interested in something that I'm interested in. And, I've had like very little success. So I think some people are just more inclined to like things than others. I think like in a group like in this class, like everyone loves that. And it's hard to like imagine people not liking animals because we all love them so much. But then I also like kind of like during break took a moment. I'm like, are there any things that like I would just never be interested in? There's like things, there's some topics that it's like I had a friend who has a PhD in physics. He absolutely loves physics. I hate physics. Like I he can talk about it and say what's interesting about it, and I listen and I engage, and I can't, and I understand its importance, and I just can't. Like I'm never gonna be passionate about crypto. So it's
Uh,
it's it's like I think that applies to some people with animals. Maybe it's less likely because maybe like animals can be a little bit more relatable than topics like that, I guess. But I think if you don't have that in you, I don't know if it's possible to bring it out to the point where like, we're seeing changes in behavior that we want to see. Like maybe like, oh, that's cool. But is it like oh, I'm gonna change my lifestyle or I'm gonna change my habits because like this I had this little spark.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a fair point. And and I understand, you said like, oh, I never really had friends that were interested in the same things as me or whatever. Maybe because I've had the same experience, believe me. Virtually none, actually none of my friends, and as you get older, friendship takes a different definition, but uh, none of my friends really have a deep passion for animals. And so I understand, and it doesn't matter. I could talk about them all day. It wouldn't change that. That actually brings me to the thing that I wrote right after wrote this question, and that is if if that wiring is left untouched, unsparked long enough, can it atrophy? Can it die? Right? Like if you just let it sit and wither, kind of like a muscle. If you just never walk and then you try to one day walk, your legs aren't going to have any musculature. You just fall over, right? Can that spark die? Or can you wall it off or something like that? Annabeth.
I honestly don't think so. And
Okay.
I don't think so because I've seen so many people like after retirement go into birding and bird watching. Like that's like a guy hobby. You know how like sometimes dads have hobbies?
I
That's a dad
do.
hobby. And I think that it's possible. And also I feel like sometimes other family members can reignite that spark. Um, like my family, my parents they're not really into animals, but ever since I started doing this program, my dad sends me pictures of birds and he's like, "What is this bird?" Yeah.
Well, that's nice.
So I think my appreciation for animals helps them appreciate animals. Contagious.
It's contagious. Yeah. Could it? Well, let's just continue on with Ryan. I have other questions, but uh, I think you're muted, Ryan.
Hello? Okay.
Hi.
Hi. So I think for your question on if it can atrophy over time or if um it can be depleted over time, I think in a way, yes. I think people and just maybe it's just human nature. I would love to like take some sort of psychology class and like human psychology as well, because I feel like people just get so stuck on their own ideas. And I think we mentioned it a little bit like a brick wall, like earlier. I think it becomes stubbornness almost like you've just believed and thought this one thing for so long. And I think a couple people have had some good examples, but I have two cats. My dad grew up with cats and he hates cats, hates them, hates them. He calls them roadkill, he calls them speed bump. And I love my dearest cats, but then for Christmas, he got my cats a couple different gifts, and but he will still say that cats are the worst. He doesn't like them, target practice, stuff like that.
Okay.
Um, and he won't admit to it. I'm like, you're just a stubborn old man. You don't want to let me know that you like cats. And I feel like at some point, other people and their opinions on nature, on zoos or um, wildlife, like they just get stuck in what they believe and aren't willing to change. They aren't willing to take in new ideas. Which is more detrimental for them, if anything. But I do think with enthusiasm, with people like everyone in here who have passion and want to share it, and if you can find the right way to interpret that to somebody who, is a brick wall or is being stubborn in their own ways, then you can definitely bring some of that back. And maybe one day I will get my dad to admit he's a cat lover. But
I really like that you brought up psychology. I mean, that's what that's really what we're talking about right now. We're talking about psychology. Um, s- One thing I have learned through a lot of trial and error and just living life for 40 years is that it is so important to understand what makes people think the way they think and how they think. And psychology is really, really valuable for anyone that's doing any job where they interact with people. Particularly if you're an educator, it's really valuable. And just like you were saying, people as they get older, and this is true, this is known, um, as as you get older and older, you become more and more set in your ways. Your opinions uh, don't they're not just opinion at some point. They become sort of your identity. The things you believe become solidified into your identity. And it is an incredibly difficult thing for someone to take in new information that would change their identity, right? You're not just changing your opinion, you're changing who you think you are. And that is psychologically a very challenging thing. So, yeah, maybe it's not atrophy. Maybe it's like I said, like maybe a walling off of that part of you. Tiffany.
Uh, Funny that we mentioned psychology. We've been mentioning our sisters. Um, my sister, we watched the same things growing up. We had the same experiences relatively. Um, and she has told me to my face that once you go to one zoo, you've been to them all. So she's not kind of that animal. She doesn't hate them. She enjoys them. She understands their worth, things like that. But I have not been able to just kind of spark that, oh yeah, animals are cool. I want to learn more and anything. She Maybe it's because I like them that she doesn't want to really delve into them. We also have that kind of relationship. But she would come to zoos with us and everything like that, and it seemed more of like a transaction that this was the thing I was interested in, and then after we did the thing I was interested in, we got to go to the art gallery to do what she wanted to do. She is a double major in psych and art, and I'm the biology major, so we're not really similar in many things. And now she has two, soon to be three young children, and even seeing their curiosity, it's not necessarily that they like coming to see me at the zoo and learn about the animals that she's kind of curious and interested about. It's their legitimate reactions. They're excited, so she's excited. But being around the animals isn't the exciting part. So I have personally witnessed, there are some times where people are just like, it's just not for me, but you do you, that's really cool. Like, that's fine. And it's interesting to see it in someone. We are only about a year and a half apart, so we grew up doing the exact same things. And I could never, like, her interest is in entirely different things compared to us. Now, she still loves going outside, she still loves being in nature, but she doesn't feel the need to learn more about it like I do, irregardless of the same experiences that we had.
Well, it's interesting. So I think maybe a point to think about there is you're talking about the extent of the depth of interest, essentially. Like you said, she still loves to be out in nature and things like that, but just doesn't want to, like, I don't know, read tomes about the different things in nature per se. Um, and so I think that's something I guess to consider when we're thinking about this whole discussion is like the sort of depth of the extent of the excitement for the thing. Um, Interesting. Annabeth.
After hearing everyone, well, not every, well, people talk about this topic, I think it's more not really an age issue, but just a person's willingness to be flexible
Hmm.
and kind of not abandon their ways, but kind of modify their beliefs in a way that integrates appreciation for zoos and natural history and things of that nature. Because if you're so stuck in your own ways, it's hard to change that. But if you have willingness and flexibility, then it's probably easier to change. especially if you have others in your family or someone you're close to who has that appreciation. Kind of rub off on them.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I will say that age does affect how stuck in people get. The older you are, the more and more and more solidified you become in the in your self identity, and that's a part of it. But yes, you can be fairly young and also just be stubbornly, I am this way, and that's just it, for sure. Caitlin.
So I don't know how feasible this is for zoos, but as we were talking about like changing attitudes and everything, I thought of three people in my life recently that have kind of changed their attitude towards animals because of their dog. And like their dog ended up having this major impact. And not all of them were even people that I would call like animal people or people that even really sought out having a dog. Like one person I know, her whole life, she had kind of a fearful relationship with animals where she was curious, but fearful. And her partner got a dog and she got really into training, and it really kind of bolstered this feeling of like a connection to animals and seeing them in a different light. And another friend, same kind of thing, not fearful, but like not quite as curious about animals, just not very into it. And her family dog started aging and they started making accommodations for it to make its life better. And she saw it like experience this positive change as they accommodated its aging, changing needs. And that kind of like humanized animals a bit, which I know we don't always want to anthropomorphize, but like seeing her dog go through just like changes with age and being able to make improvements for it, like kind of reshaped the way she looked at animals. And I know somebody else that has had pets but never really liked any of them. They were family pets. And then she recently got a puppy, and that kind of changed her attitude. So I don't know how zoos can bring that into focus, but I have seen in the last like 2 years, three people in my life kind of change their attitude towards animals because of their dog.
Yeah, that's sort of what we're talking about, maybe as like an experience that sparks that passion, maybe just interacting with very closely with an animal like a pet. Yeah. Bjorn.
This might be kind of besides the point, but I really thought about this when you said, the older people get, the more stuck in the ways they get. And I feel like at some point, curiosity kind of like switches back on again. Because what some of my favorite programs I've ever done, we actually started doing these programs when I got hired by the reptile zoo. So I got to do a bunch of them, but they were at nursing homes. And obviously when you go there, I mean, you have like people in various states, various levels of consciousness, but those were the funnest programs. They were awesome, and I had so many great interactions. And the only people that were ever like freaked out or it's like, oh, I'm not going in that room. They were all the workers, the employees, and the nurses and stuff like that. But all the elderly people that were there, I mean, they loved it, and it was
Yeah.
so much fun. And um, it almost felt like I was giving a program to more respectful children. But like that level of curiosity and interest, I felt like it was really there again. And so um just psychologically, I find this conversation really interesting because I do feel like there's almost a point where that just interest and curiosity peaks again.
I think that's a really, really good point. Yeah, there's this sort of, and I've seen this certainly in my, uh, well, in my family, um, it's a sort of liberation of uh, of the spirit, if you will, as you reach this certain age. You become very free and in some ways childlike. You have to get pretty far up there, it seems, to hit that point. I think if we could hit it sooner in life, we'd all be a hell of a lot happier, to be honest. It's what some people might joke and say, like, oh, I can't wait to get old enough that I don't give a crap anymore and I can just do what just be who I am. Uh, and of course, it's not so easy to do that. But I think when you hit that point, you kind of free yourself of your identity. You don't care what anyone else thinks, and you just do you. And um, yeah, I don't want to get like super deeply philosophical in this, so I'm not just going to keep meandering on here. But I think there's a lot to be said about that. And I think you're 100% correct, Bjorn. There is a threshold where you almost do a complete 180 toward the end of your life. Taylor, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious if it's like a brain change or it's like societal pressures cause people like in like, that are working and like they worry about rent, they worry about food. Like when you get older, you're a little bit more financially stable, you have less responsibility. So maybe like all of the things that we have to worry about, it kind of makes caring about like animals and nature less interesting because it's just not a priority. Like people, I talked about this, I think, in my essay or one of my posts. It's like, or one of my questions, it's like people like aren't going to spend money to go to the zoo if they don't know where their next meal is coming from. Like when you're older and maybe like you've been, in the field a long time, have some retirement stuff, maybe get some social security. Like you don't have to like worry about those things, and this freedom, like this financial freedom, this like responsibility freedom comes along, and you're able to like reconnect because you see it in kids and maybe like, they don't have really any responsibilities, and then when you get to like this older stage, like the lack of responsibilities and societal pressures kind of really like kind of go away as well. So maybe like that has something to do with it, and like the way that our society is structured and built kind of inhibits people from that spark or like that innate maybe that we have, connection with nature.
Sorry, I forgot. I didn't realize I muted myself. Um, I think you're absolutely 100% correct, Taylor. Uh, you might be interested, if you're interested in philosophy, to read some Stoicism, because it's a fairly it's not just a Stoic idea, but it's something that Stoic philosophy would discuss uh, in a manner of speaking, the way that what they would maybe call externals, things that really lie outside of us that we don't have any control over, really dictate a lot of how we behave and respond to our world. Um, it goes far beyond this discussion, so you can dig into some Epictetus if you're curious. But um, it's absolutely true that, well, I was just said a little bit ago when I was kind of joked. I said I want to go back to my childhood, and then I joked about like how different, how different one is as a child, how different one is at the end of life. Yeah, and that a lot of that has to do with societal pressure. There is a not just societal pressure, but it's specifically the way we live versus the way other people live affects the way they view the world. So I follow this woman named Akech Winnie Joy. Akech Winnie Joy, this is going to sound really, really weird, but work with me for a second, is a supermodel. Okay. Um, she's from Uganda. I do not follow her because she's a supermodel. All right. That's not what this is about. I follow her because she's fascinating. She has like walked on runways for famous fashion brands like Gucci. I don't know them all because I don't really care about that part of her life at all. The part that's interesting is she could live anywhere in the world that she wanted to live, right? Like that's the kind of life that she has available to her. She go anywhere. And she is from Uganda, from a little village in Uganda. And where did she choose to go back to is that little village in Uganda. She lives in a hut, like a legit thatch roof hut. All of her possessions, she makes videos and talks about her life and why it's much, much better than uh, the other lives that she's been exposed to. Uh, all of her possessions fit in a little metal box. It's not like she doesn't have money, okay? Like she has money. She could have probably whatever she wanted. Um, she lives in a hut, and they live very close to nature there. And she talks about like, why did I come back here? Right? Why did I come back here? And she says, like, it's this air, it's this soil, it's this way of life. This is a great way to live. And she's happy. And you can tell just by watching her talk about um, the way that she lives. She's extremely happy. And I watch her and I think, what the hell are we doing? That looks so much better. Wow, what an amazing life. I'm not saying that there's nothing good about what we have. There are great things about the way we live. Really, really great things. But that's simple. It's very in harmony with nature. Uh, and yeah, if my wife ever leaves me, I'm moving to Uganda. I think that's really the plan. I'm going to go live in a hut in Uganda and pick fruit off trees every day and herd cattle. That'll be the rest of my life. That's the plan. So yes, uh, Taylor, I absolutely think that the pressures that we create in that are created for us in the life that we live here in the United States really affect the way we look at the world. We don't, if you're very stressed about your job, if you're very stressed about paying the bills, things like that, you don't have nearly as much time to sit and revere nature. You're right? Like you just don't because your mind is preoccupied with other things. There are some practices that can help you overcome those parts of your life. Um, things like meditation, things like that, that can kind of help you work through some of those challenges so that you can spend more time on the aspects of your life that you really enjoy, things like thinking about the natural world and respecting the natural world. Um, so yeah, great question. Great question. Um, okay. So someone brought up FOMO. You guys know what FOMO is? So I don't remember who brought it up. Someone brought up FOMO and how FOMO can get people that are a little bit timid to jump in and do something they might not do otherwise. I think that is a really great point that's maybe really valuable if you're a zoo educator, right? If you can use that FOMO to get people that are like, I don't know about touching the snake, to get in and touch the snake, that could be the spark. That could be the connection that kid needs, right? Or even that adult, doesn't have to be a kid, but that person needs. And so I thought that was a really nice point that I wanted to make sure that I circled back to it and pointed that out. And then I think it was Ryan mentioned and was talking about sort of connecting with what motivates us, right? And I think that was a really great thing to talk about as well. And one thing I would want to ask about that though is what, how can a zoo find those underlying motivations, particularly in the groups that are most in need of the messages that zoos are carrying with them? That would be a hell of an essay question. 12 pages next week. No, no, right. How could a zoo find that information? How can they tease apart what your motivations are, especially if you're not someone that's already just coming to a zoo all the time? It's a hard question. Bjorn.
I talked a little bit about this actually in the midterm essay. And this is almost a little bit of a darker take on it because you're not necessarily inspiring through positivity, but more so inspiring through, um, I was gonna say through fear, but it's really just through the facts of what's coming with like climate change and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I think a huge part of what zoos can do is not just, approach conservation from like the intrinsic values of the animals, for example, but connect that to people, talk about why that conservation is necessary for people and the repercussions that will come if it doesn't happen. Uh, One of the things I mentioned was like the palm plantations that are completely destroying orangutan habitat. And I talked a lot about how, forests, they have a net carbon sink. But that area where they basically cut down all the forest for the plantations, um, there is no longer a carbon sink. There is a net carbon increase in that area because of that destruction. And it's a perfect example of, what could potentially happen if we continue this rapid deforestation. So I think just connecting those problems to humans and making them very, very real, is a great way to accomplish that.
Okay. So you're I would it's like the dark side of the force. Not really, I'm just kidding, but it's you sort of like maybe almost forcing people's hand in a way to say like it's this or really bad. That's what that's what you got to do. Okay. Um, Ryan.
So I haven't really thought of this much, but something I thought of is maybe if zoos were to connect with things that aren't necessarily zoo or nature related, and made it related. I think I can't remember who it was, talked about the retirement communities, like bringing education there, bringing animals to them, people who probably haven't seen or thought of this for a while. I mentioned fitness earlier. Well, if zoos like our zoo, we do like 5Ks and stuff. We have a bike ride. There's also programs for our docents are retired individuals to walk at the zoo early in the morning, stuff like that. Um, and then just more community outreach. And like I know we're kind of focusing on those who aren't maybe as involved. So I think zoos also need to kind of get with the times a little bit, and work on their advertisement, work on their outreach and partnering with different people, so they can get more of the word out, I guess. For instance, like there's people who are at home and maybe they want to go outside for whatever reason, but like their community or their livelihood just doesn't direct them towards something like that. So can zoos do a better job at simply spreading more, I say advertisement, I don't know a better word for it right now. More advertising and saying, hey, here's the things we're doing, and tying that to nature for people who don't think about it like that.
Yeah. I like the outreach and the like you're talking about a 5K or whatever. Yeah, I think if you can tie in things that aren't really what you think of as zoo things, that might be a way to pull people in to have some of those experiences that might change their mind. That like if their underlying motivation is I like to run or I like to bike or whatever, right? Having something like a 5K could bring them in and that can build that connection. So that's a good idea. Caitlin.
A lot of what I was just gonna say, Ryan covered of
Okay.
like doing events that are not traditional animal events. Like we do yoga at the zoo, we have a biking event at the zoo, we have a run walk 5K type thing at the zoo. But then the other thing I was going to say is one of the things that I think can bring in different motivators is if you take money out of the equation. So some zoos occasionally do free days, and they can be a nightmare for the staff because the zoo just gets like massive numbers of people. So it is a logistical challenge. But I think if you take money out of it, you might get people who maybe they're coming to the zoo not for the animals, but like to get their kids out of the house for the day or to just get outside and walk around. And the zoo normally isn't something that's available to them for financial reasons, but maybe getting them through the door on a free day will spark an interest in something they might not have anticipated at the zoo. Maybe they'll fall in love with the butterfly house or the reptile house, and maybe they've never been able to go before. So I think that doing diverse events helps get people different motivations, but I think also making the zoo more available to people at different like socioeconomic levels, because like the zoo can be really expensive for a family. I mean, you're talking tickets, food, drinks, if there's any other like a carousel at the zoo that costs extra money that the kids want to do. Like the zoo is a big expenditure. So I think zoos have to make money. I understand that, but I think that more like discount days or free days or making something available like to certain school districts or neighborhoods, I think that could be a game changer for people that the zoo just feels unattainable for.
Yeah, that's a great point. You're right. The zoo is not it's not cheap. Um, at least not for the average person. And if you're someone who really is in a socioeconomic bind, um, you know, that's problematic. Annabeth.
I was just going to mention a couple more examples that I wrote about in my paper,
Mm.
but more and more, there's a paper I cited that's community engagement. Something that's been happening a lot more in recent years is getting married at the zoo, having weddings. So I know a lot of zoos use like they have certain places that's a wedding venue. Um, Personally, I think that sounds pretty cool because not only is it involving conservation and your money is going to that zoo for the venue, but it's also pretty cool. And I would love
Mm.
to get married around frogs. Maybe that's just me. Also birthday parties and other events, like conventions. If the zoo has the capability to hold that, I think that is a great way of outreach.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I hadn't thought about weddings at a zoo, but that sounds pretty cool. Uh, Taylor.
I think another cool way, or like kind of like a kind way that zoos kind of make themselves a little bit more available to people that maybe not necessarily can't afford it, is that I know Woodland Park Zoo, Point Defiant Zoo and Aquarium, and Seattle Aquarium offered like really, really, really steep discounts for people that have like EBT cards and like people that have like SNAP benefits and things like that. So people that go through like this process that like kind of like prove that they're lower income, like the zoos will offer lower rates for them to make them a little bit more accessible and things like that. And I think because your original question kind of, I know we kind of got a little bit, but was it like how can zoos better understand like what people's motivators are?
Yeah, how can you figure it out? I think what
Yeah.
people have, I'm sorry, go ahead, Taylor. Yeah.
No, sorry. I think that I don't know if this is kind of simple on my end, but like the first thing that came to mind is like they should ask. You know what I mean? Just like
Um,
ask people like why. Like do like a survey maybe and like, hey, what's motivating you? You know what I mean? Like kind of like do like
like, what are
a
you
voting.
into?
I don't
Hmm.
know. I don't
Absolutely,
know.
absolutely. And that's a fair, I think that's a very fair, very straightforward, um, view on things. Of it. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the issue is that when you get it's you can ask people that come to your zoo pretty easily, right? Like they come in, you can ask literally have someone standing at the gate to be like, "Hey, would you be willing to talk to me for 2 minutes about, you know, your your zoo experience or whatever?" And then they can ask that question. Um, if the person's willing to talk. But it's getting to the people that don't already visit and figuring out what their motivations are to get them to come in and to get them to connect is difficult. So I think the way most people have approached that in this discussion is by presenting options that might interest people that would not traditionally. You're sort of shotgunning ideas that like, well, people like running 5Ks or biking or whatever. So we're going to offer that too, and hopefully we catch some people we would normally catch, and can build those connections. Um, yeah, if there was a way to reach out to those other people and be like, hey, what would you like to see at the zoo? Right? We're doing weddings and 5Ks now. How would you feel if we put like, I don't know, a bowling alley at the zoo? Would you be more willing to come? I mean, that's a really silly. Maybe it's silly. I don't know if it's silly. Um, it's a somewhat ridiculous example, but you get the point. Yeah, ask ultimately. I agree.
You guys were all so positive about it.
Bjorn's over here. Make them fear the world.
You want to survive, don't you? Doesn't that motivate you?
Doesn't, yeah. Survival is a hell of a motivator, I hear. That's I think that's the strategy of dictators, Bjorn. I think no, um I liked in Bjorn in your paper that you went sort of kind of started from the like uh Harry Green uh like wildness discussion and then you went that way with it. Um okay. Do I have anything? Man, I don't think I've ever spent 2 hours just delving through. That was like half of one question that when we just went. I think that was such a valuable and interesting conversation, though. Um, I think ultimately, sort of some of the things that we kind of came to, I guess we need to summarize our 2 hours of discussion in some way, is that at least most people, but maybe not 100% of people, probably have innately sitting somewhere in the wiring of their mind a curiosity about the natural world that might be able to connect them to the natural world if it is turned on. But not all people have the experience that really leads to that happening. And I think it's probably fair to say in a more modern world where we spend so much time on our phones and so much time in a fluorescent bulb lit building office or not as much time outside, it's harder for people to get that spark to begin with, right? We live in a world that makes it more difficult, but I think intrinsically most people have it. We just need to turn it on, so we need to give people experiences that can do that. um I think that's at least one major point of discussion that we somewhat all kind of agreed on. um and that one way to draw people in so that we can give them experiences that hopefully will spark that curiosity is through uh, understanding the different things that motivate and interest people to draw people in that wouldn't normally necessarily come to a zoo. It's easy enough to interact with or uh, spark the curiosity of people that are regular zoo goers, but much more difficult maybe for others. And also, there's a deeply psychological component to all of this in that uh, depending on the lives of the people that we're talking about, how much responsibility they bear, um, the pressures and challenges going on in their lives, and their age, those things can all affect how amenable they are to our efforts to sway them to make those connections and become passionate about conservation. So I think that is a reasonable summary of this last 2 hours of discussion. If anybody is like, you forgot to say something, speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay. All right. That was fantastic. I don't even want to talk about anything else tonight. I'm sated. Let's take a look though. So there's a cultural shift and relevancy stuff. We didn't really talk about the I talked a little bit about cultural shift stuff, I guess. We did. We just kind of went all over the place with that. Now I'm going to skip question two. Not that it's not important, but I'm going to skip it. This is very tied into, gosh, that question is like, that's question 10, not question three. Question 10 is like what we were just talking about. Groups of people. Okay, well, let's talk about question three. A lot of this stuff's going to be really connected to what we were just discussing. But question three, what groups of people specifically are unlikely to make many personal connections with nature due to increased urbanization and shifting culture? And does this in any way explain popularity of zoos? So, Jasmine Anderson, we are in the last hour.
I don't know if you can hear me too well. I have a vacuum in the background.
I can hear you.
But for this one, I said that the people who are unlikely to make personal connections with nature due to increased urbanization and shifting culture are people who are economically depressed or marginalized segments of society. Zoos are usually placed in metropolitan areas that are accessible for people living in urbanized areas, making them very popular as one of the only forms of nature for most people.
Yeah. Yeah. So, literally, for some people, it's like your only real nature exposure that you can get, especially in some cities where having, uh, in New York, for example, a lot of people don't even have a car. A lot of people don't have a car, and so you've got Central Park, right? You've got the Bronx Zoo. I mean, that's what you got. Your exposure to nature is incredibly limited, um, and so for those people, that's a big deal. Ryan.
Yeah, I was gonna look to see where I found it in the book, but actually for question one, I had wrote that urban wildlife is not always recognized as nature. So for people that are living in these areas, I think it can be difficult to not only get access to nature, like like just parks and stuff like that, but also to recognize that as nature within such a large city or community, where quote unquote real nature is so far out of reach. Like you said, some people just don't have the means to get out there that far. Um, so I thought that was just an interesting point where it's like, okay, well, even the nature that like I immediately think of like raccoons, pigeons, stuff like that, where that's maybe not seen as nature in places like that, which I think makes it even harder and more essential for zoos to um, provide some sort of nature, at least some essence of nature in areas like this.
That's yeah, that's a really nice point. What do you guys think about the idea of urban wildlife as nature? What do we think about that? Ryan, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's probably animals that people see all the time, and I think we discussed this a lot earlier in the class where zoos are places where people want to see things that are different. And I'm sure in the nature aspect, even if it is local nature, seeing these things every day, seeing pigeons every day, for instance, I just that's a common animal in big cities, I guess.
Mhm.
I feel like eventually you're gonna look at that differently and you're not gonna be like, oh, look at that really cool bird. You're just gonna be like, oh, there's another pigeon. But then if you see a random, say a deer walks through, you're gonna be like, whoa, look at that deer. So much cooler than the pigeon. So I think that has a lot of the how often they see the animals, how often they interact with those animals, and maybe how habitual, how cool the animals are with people. That could have a lot to do with it as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. The habitualization aspect, like if an animal's like just like whatever, there's people, it doesn't feel like a very a natural experience or a wild experience. Tiffany.
Kind of along with that, a lot of, say, nature in cities, they're pests, not so much recognized as being like a living being that is also living in this world, and they have nowhere else to live because we took it over. They're just pests, and they get in your houses, and they cause illness, and they destroy things and things like that. So they've actually separated those organisms from nature themselves, because they see them in concrete and human dwellings and things like that. Um, Kind of like how like mice anywhere, whether you live near a field or you live in the city, that's a pest. It's not supposed to be there because you say it's not supposed to be there. So I think that's a major problem. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of people that see pigeons in the city every day and are still stoked to see a pigeon. Um, I would love to see pigeons all the time, and I work with two of them. But I think that's one of the major problems is uh their actual relationship with the humans they share space with. Where if they're competing for resources, they're no longer going to consider it nature. They're only caring about that competition.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that's only in some ways that's the most natural of all things is the competition between organisms, right? Uh, it's urban ecology uh, with humans as the major competitor. It's pretty cool to think about that. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I try to imagine. I have tried many times to imagine what it'd be like to live in a city. I spent one week. I during my PhD, I had to go to the American Museum of Natural History to do some research, and I spent a week crashing on a guy's couch in Brooklyn. And so I got to like really experience the New York life for a week and like having to go hit the subway and travel around, not having access to a vehicle or anything. And in some ways, I really kind of liked it. The public transportation was really nice. But and I try to imagine being someone that really enjoys nature. What would I do? How would I interact with that landscape on a regular basis if I lived there? And what would I just watch pigeons all the time? Is that what, I'm not sure that I would. I know already, and it's a, you guys were talking about, oh, once you see the same thing so many times, maybe it becomes less exciting. That's definitely true for me, even though I know in my heart that's really not a good way to look at things. Uh, there are certain birds that I've seen so many times that like I still appreciate them. Like, don't get me wrong. Uh, but I'm like, I I'd like to see a new bird now. Like that'd be really exciting to see something I haven't seen literally thousands of times. Um, there are some birds though that I see all the time that I still am like, oh man, what an awesome bird. Like I love Eastern towhees. I love Eastern towhees. They're so cool. Um, I like I love their little calls. Uh, I I love the way they look, I love everything about them, and I've seen gajillions of them, and I still get excited by them. So, but like, there are other birds that I don't get that excited about anymore. Um, like I really like gray catbirds, but holy crap, I have banded so many, like I haven't just seen them, I have physically held and put little tiny numbered bracelets on their little legs. Uh, Gajillions of them. And so there are times that I get to a net and I'm like, what do you know? It's another gray catbird. Cleo.
I was just gonna add on. I've heard, I don't know, 400 plus Eastern screech owls, and I get so excited every single
Every
time I hear
time.
a little guy yelling at me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great, there's something about them that is I think because they're very secretive. And it's like finding a little hidden treasure across the landscape every time. It's actually a little bit like gambling, right? Because when you go out to look for them, you're going out and you play a call and it's kind of like pulling a slot lever on a slot machine. You're just really hoping to hit jackpot and get that call back. And so it's a little bit like gambling. It can be a little addicting and it is exciting. And especially if you get like two or three of them calling from one call, it's pretty neat. Caitlin.
I think people definitely do get habituated to things that they see all the time. But I think sometimes somebody else's excitement can almost like bring it back for you. I was recently in New York in Central Park not all that long ago, and I saw this woman frantically scolding her husband to try to get a picture of this eastern gray squirrel, and she was making him like chase after it. And I was like, "Oh, you're not from like the Midwest or like, Eastern United States, are you?" And she was like, "No, I'm from Australia." And she was so excited to see the squirrel. And I was like, "You know what? It is pretty cute." And she was like, "What is it?" And I was like, it's an eastern gray squirrel." And she's like, "What do you call it? A squirrel?" And I was like, "Yep, it's a squirrel." And like she was so just genuinely excited to see the squirrel in Central Park. And I was like, "You don't have to run after that one. You will see more." But like it did kind of make me appreciate it again. And I think that that could be applied in other areas with their relationship with wildlife, where we're like one person's enthusiasm can kind of bring it back for somebody that's maybe lost some of it.
That's a wonderful point to bring up. Actually, I'm gonna pick on Cleo for a minute. I'm not really picking on Cleo, but so last summer at the Tiffany, I'll get you in just a second. Last summer at the beginning of the MAPS season, MAPS is the summer banding stuff we do. It was the very first net check, if I recall. Uh, very first bird was a gray catbird. Is that correct, Cleo? It was the very first, yeah. And Cleo had not seen a gray catbird before. And she was training and learning how to do the maps protocol and everything. And Cleo was like, "Oh, this is so exciting." Like she's thrilled, just like what you're talking about, thrilled. And I said, "You're going to see so many gray catbirds by the end of this summer," which you did. I did not lie to you. Um, and but it did reinvigorate a little in me excitement for seeing them again. Seeing someone else excited about them does do something. I don't know what that is. It made me be a little introspective about how I thought about that particular species after seeing so many of them. So it's a great point. Also, just as an aside, I don't know how you could ever get bored with gray squirrels. Like you watch those guys, they're funny. Man, they're funny critters. They just do funny crap. The way they play around with each other and they're goofy. I love watching squirrels. All kinds of squirrels are fun. Tiffany.
Kind of flipping that around, my last facility had a budgie house,
Hmm.
and our director, he had some friends come that literally live on a secluded island in Australia, and their backyard pests are budgies and like cockatiels, all this stuff that we're so excited to see. And so sitting there and then me being so excited to see the pictures of literally their patio where they're trying to kick out these cockatiels because they're picking on like the lorikeets and stuff and trying to like make sure, or not the cockatiels, it was actually, I think they did have some, did they have some, that was other ones. They had cockatiels, but other bigger birds as well. And I always try to remember that, like, oh, just because it's like my backyard isn't everyone's backyard, and we get very insular, especially with, like, I've seen people so excited to see a chipmunk, and, I admit it, they're cute, and I get just excited to see, like, an American toad, and I'll go dig him out of a hole or whatever. But to see it from the other side of being like, oh yeah, this is like their every day. They get to see these animals. They're not exotic to them. Is kind of, it makes you think really hard about it. Because I was like, oh, I see people so excited to see this every minute of every day. And these people are like, they're pests in my backyard and we try to chase them away. It always makes me giggle. You're muted.
Sorry. You saying that reminded me of a comic I really like, so I had to pull it up. Uh, I'm not sure how to share this with you guys. I tried to just copy it into the uh
You could share your screen at the bottom of the page.
yeah, that's a lot of work. Share advanced sharing options. That sounds advanced. It's It's not. Why can't I share my screen?
You could also just put the link in the chat.
Oh, that's fair. That's a very, very fair point. That's what I will do. Solving problems. All right. Oh, I figured out what the whole problem was. I'm sending it to Jalen Todd, who was in here for 30 seconds at the beginning of the night. Did everybody get that? So it's just a comic about cardinals. I really like it though. It's just you've got these people that are completely unexcited about these cardinals, and then people that don't normally see them, and they're like, "Oh my God," and it's just like it's to remind you to be appreciative of the things that maybe you're really, really accustomed to seeing, and it's a nice message in a little comic. Cleo.
Speaking of cardinals, I was at the bank whenever I was home over spring break, and I have like a bunch of bird tattoos, and one of the guy that I was dealing with was from Washington State, and he's just getting into like birding and stuff, and he was just talking to me about cardinals and how cool cardinals are. And I was like, you know what? You're right. Cardinals are cool, but like, we see them literally 15 times a day if you're looking.
At least, yeah. Also, if you've ever been bit by one, they might not be your favorite because they hurt. Um, they are some wicked biters. My God. Um, yeah. So, anyways, the yeah, I think the whole point of that message is just to appreciate the things that we have that are close to us, even when they're very common. What time is it? 9:26. Okay. Let's take a look. Feel like this is a question that it's like that. Why isn't that the question in the first week? Why do zoos exhibit animals? It's a fair question to ask. Why do zoos do this? All right, Tiffany.
I'm gonna give the very political education answer.
Okay.
Um, which is to increase public knowledge and awareness about animals and to turn education into conservation action.
Okay. I think that's a great answer. Ryan, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I think I'm getting all of my readings mixed up, but I read somewhere on something that uh, multiple sources obviously say that public interaction with animals is going to increase, or at least help to increase your pro-environmental behaviors. But I think a lot of like, minus the conservation efforts that are behind scenes, having the animals there is a big part of the like public conservation. Like people aren't going to a zoo for many other things other than to see animals. And like someone said earlier, education is a byproduct. So zoos are exhibiting their animals so that they can have people that they can influence. Without the animals, you don't have people you can influence. So that is that's a major part of their conservation mission. Minus like direct influence on animals, it's also direct influence on public.
Okay. Does anybody else have any thoughts? That's okay. You don't have to have any other thoughts. All right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways you could answer that question. I think those were both, yeah, really good thoughts about that question. Um, no one said the like bad guy, you know, to make money. No one said that. I don't know. Think about it. I don't know if that's wrong. Okay. Question 8. How is animal husbandry very important to changing visitor behaviors into pro-environmental behaviors? Bjorn.
You want to provide good husbandry so you can encourage natural healthy behaviors because oftentimes those healthy behaviors is what's going to encourage a visitor or a patron to respond positively to the animal and to whatever conservation message that you're presenting. And, that will probably have a pretty big impact on whether or not they're going to exhibit pro-environmental behaviors in the future.
Okay. If an animal, as a result of poor husbandry in this particular instance, is exhibiting maybe signs of stress or signs of depression, you have your depressed polar bear from earlier. Um, would that cause the viewers to leave maybe with a less friendly outlook on pro-environmentalism? Is that possible, Ryan?
I don't know if this is gonna hit your question or not, but it made me think about it. Punch the Monkey, who we all know and love, that poor little baby. A lot of people, if you don't know who Punch the Monkey is, does everyone know who Punch the Monkey is? Okay, so I feel like now that people are watching Punch and a lot of people are sharing their opinions and are basically like they see a stressed animal, they see an animal who's being stressed out and kind of being bullied by the other ones. Us as managers like or animal caretakers know that that's mostly primate behavior, but other people are visualizing it as something completely different and are putting things out like the zoo should be shut down. Now, I'm sure that there are things to criticize about his management and care, as there are for many zoos, but I think that's a really good example of people are seeing husbandry or welfare, and they are interpreting it, you know what I mean, one way that maybe isn't like the super correct way, but it's still having effect on that zoo. Like now that zoo is getting hate and will eventually, I'm sure, affect how that zoo operates.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's more of in that case, a negative outlook on the zoo itself as opposed to maybe a less pro-environmental thing. Caitlin.
My example, so I accidentally contributed to a bad organization before on vacation. I was in another country and I had kind of been wanting to see like local native wildlife, and the people at this resort had directed me to what turned out to be a zoo, but I thought it was going to be more like drive through, talk about like the wildlife in the area, but it was actually just like a bunch of animals in really small, horrible cages, and the guides actually like poking at the animals to get them to move. But like it made me feel so bad that I had participated in that, that it didn't make me obviously not pro-environmental, but it was like I am going to think really long and hard before I go to a facility or organization in another country that I'm not familiar with, because I could accidentally contribute to something not so great and like have a lasting bad feeling about it. And I think
Yeah.
that could happen to other people, like even here in the US, if they go to a zoo and they see a lot of stereotypic behaviors or animals that seem stressed, I think it could turn into like maybe all zoos are like this if they're not familiar with other zoos, or maybe all zoos are just looking to make a profit and exploit animals. So I think it could definitely turn into non-friendly feelings about zoos and the work they do.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. What I would say to this is that it goes, I think, beyond just a negative outlook on the zoo itself. Zoos, for at least for a lot of people, for people who aren't the zoo workers, for lay people, zoos are sort of a voice of conservation, or they're supposed to be, or a voice of environmentalism, right? They're sort of an authority that people can look up to. And if that authority leaves you with a bad feeling in your gut, it's going to give you, I think, a negative perception of what pro-environmentalism even looks like. This pro-environmental place has sad animals. Like that doesn't that seems like BS, right? Like that sucks. Maybe pro-environmentalism isn't so good. So if you look up to the zoo as this voice of environmental goodness, and then they leave you feeling bad, it literally might give you a little bit of an anti-environmental sort of perspective when you leave. At least that's how I see it. I don't think anyone's going to be like, well, burn down the Amazon. That zoo sucked. I don't think it's going to be quite to that extent. But you might think of the people um, that claim to be pro-environmental in a negative light, right? Because this place that's supposed to be pro-environmental has these sad animals. I went to a zoo. I was in the Carolinas, I think, somewhere. It was like a little roadside random zoo. We like saw it completely randomly. We had no intention of going there. We're like, oh, a zoo, and we just stopped and went in to the zoo. And um, they had they had wolves, and those wolves were very clearly stressed. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. And they were in a relatively, I feel like, pretty small enclosure for what I've seen wolves in before. I'm not a wolf keeper, so I'm no expert on the subject, but and I remember just that experience alone making me feel, you know, pretty. I was like, I just want to leave now. Like, I don't even want to go through the rest of the zoo. So, obviously, it didn't change my environmental perspectives, but I mean, I'm not like the average person going to the zoo either. I have a bit of a different perspective on those things. But I can see how someone that's just a random person going to that zoo that isn't educated in environmental and in environmental biology and conservation biology might come out with a different take. Taylor.
Yeah, I just think it's very important to realize how impactful a bad experience or like, like a gut feeling can be. Like a zoo can be doing a bunch of great things, but if someone sees something that they're like, I don't know, like it can just ruin the entire experience for them. Like it's just like one bad thing versus 10 good things. No, you know what I mean? Like I don't like that anymore. So you have to be like very careful about that because you can be, like I said, you can be doing a lot of good things, but if one thing maybe is not up to par, it could have some lasting effects on people and like kind of your reputation.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um it doesn't it's kind of I remember this it was like a sort of like a demotivational poster if you guys know what I'm talking about from back in the day and it said like no one remembers the 100 good things I do every day. But that one bad thing, everyone remembers it. And it's really, really true. It only takes one bad thing. And everyone remembers the bad thing you did, no matter how many good things you do afterwards. And that's definitely true, not just for individuals, but for institutions, zoos, and things as well. So that's a good point. I guess the point is don't do any bad things at all. Just do all good things your whole life and you'll be set. Good luck with that. Let's see. How does social exchange at the zoo? Question 10. We have hit all around this, but maybe not really just punched into the heart of this question. How does social exchange at a zoo uh, play a role in changing observer behavior or visitor behavior? So social exchange is just talking to people. Annabeth.
Okay. I hope I interpreted the question correctly on my sheet, but I just wrote that not only are zoos educational and conservation facilities, but they're also very they have social implications because usually you're not going to go to a zoo by yourself.
Hmm.
Usually you're going to go with friends or family or like an educational event. And I kind of touched on this in the discussion post, but because you're with other people, you are inclined to have conversations about what you're seeing and what you're feeling about the animals. And in that way, that is encouraging pro-environmental beliefs because then uh you can talk about like facts about the animal, you can talk about what you're seeing. Does that kind of make sense? That's where my
Make,
brain is heading.
makes makes total sense. So it's what you're hitting on is the idea of a collective identity, I think. Um, and this is how whole groups of people become wrapped in a particular brand or identity is social interaction, and they just um, social media makes it really bad because you get an echo chamber and you can just bounce the same ideas off each other back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it like confirms that whatever you're saying is good, right? And so you can get really bogged down in a specific collective identity. Um, but in terms of zoos, it definitely affects uh, that social interaction affects the way you experience the whole experience of the zoo. Ryan.
Yeah, so I mentioned in mine that I appreciated that the authors acknowledged social interactions with staff, and they specifically mentioned docents. I recently at our zoo, because we've had the juvenile spider monkeys, we had our docent volunteers, which are just our adult volunteers, and usually they're retired grannies and grandpas, and I love them with all my heart.
Mhm.
But like they come through and they were watching the monkeys for us, but also interacting with the public. And I think both the reading and the discussion, and honestly, the whole paper in general, kind of made me realize like, oh, as a keeper or as just the zoo staff in general, as an educator, like generally people are going to be decently excited to talk to you. Like as a kid, like I really want to talk to keepers, and I see kids like faces light up anytime they get to chat to a keeper or come ask a keeper a question, and I think that creates a lasting experience. Additionally, because I'm a keeper and I'm wearing the green and khaki and everything, like I try to just have decent conversations with the public. I'm trying not to be like, oh, I'm giving you all this information. Let me sound like I've rehearsed this talk over and over. Like, I like, asking them about their personal lives and relating things to that or like giving examples. So I think the staff experience socially has a lot to do with how people are observing behavior and observing animals in the zoos, and have a lot in influencing, um, or I guess just changing perspective.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a great point to bring up. Um, but we've talked about at the level of the zoo being sort of genuine in the way you are, but at the level of the individual social interactions, that's important as well. Walking up to someone and then sort of having this rehearsed, like this animal is this, and we call it this, and it does this, is not a very genuine sort of experience, right? Just talk to me. Just talk to me, and we'll get there. You're eventually going to tell me the animal's name and things about the animal, but we can get there in a really in an organic way, right? That feels much better. It's a much better connection that you make with the person in that manner. Um, I try to bring that like into teaching when I sit here and talk to you guys. I'm pretty well just me, honestly. Like that's why I tell you things about like my family or when I was growing up and how that affected the way I am or things like that because it's real, it's genuine, and it's much more valuable than having some rehearsed thing that I'm going to say. And hopefully you find that better than me coming in here and being like, I have these lecture notes prepared. Sit there and listen. Um, it's uh, they're both legitimate ways to learn, but one that makes a much stronger connection. So great point. Um, does anyone else have any other thoughts about social interactions in the zoo? So I think that thinking about social interactions when you're at the zoo, not, not at any one specific level, just in general, is really important. When you have good, positive social interactions, whether it be with a docent or a keeper, or whether it be with the people that you came with, having positive social interactions leads to an overall positive experience. If you're at the zoo and you get in a fight with your significant other while you're at the zoo, that zoo experience is going to suck no matter what else happened that day, right? Social experiences really matter and shape the overall experience of the day. Anyone who's ever, been on a nice dinner with their significant other and had an argument knows that no matter how good the dinner was, you weren't like happy when you left, right? Social experience is very important to people. So, uh, it greatly, if you go through the zoo and you're having a great experience with the people that you went with, and you're talking about the animals and how cool you think they are, and you talk to the keepers and the other staff, and they tell you some really interesting things, and they're very genuine in those interactions. When you leave, you're going to feel really good about that experience. Unfortunately, one thing zoos cannot do is control whether or not two people get into a fight while they're at the zoo, or just have generally negative, social interactions. That's not always possible to control. They can only control that at the level of the staff, hopefully. Yeah, Ryan.
I just wanted to throw this out there, but like for people, I always encourage like first dates or like first outings, go to the zoo because you kind of have to talk to each other, or you can just go look at animals in silence, which lame. But um I always tell people like that's a good spot to go when like you're meeting somebody for the first time, or like maybe just people you don't see all the time or super comfortable with, because because you will kind of have to chat with each other and converse about things that maybe you both don't know about or do know about. It's just a good spot. It's a good spot.
I agree, especially for a first date because it's a neutral space, so no one's out of the neutral space. It's public, so it's safe if you're worried about, any of those sort of things. Um, and pretty much for me, if I thank God I don't have to worry about it, but if I did, I would want to know that whoever I was trying to date had some amount of interest in animals, and if they didn't, that would pretty well be the end of that discussion for me. Uh, right? It'd be like, well, I don't think we're compatible. I'm sorry. So that's yes, zoos for first dates. Excellent advice from Ryan. All right. Um, let's see here. 11 and 12 are like a combo deal. Time is it? Oh, it's like time to stop anyways. All right, we're going to stop there. When we pick up next time, we'll do a little bit of this. The next section, if I remember correctly, is fairly short in terms of questions. So that's the week 9 module stuff. So we can start by wrapping some of this up and then jump into that next thing. Thank you all for a very lucrative conversation, I would say. Really good conversation tonight. Uh, Lots of excellent ideas. Uh, if you remind me next week, I think I can give you your prompt for your final project. I know what it's going to be, and I'd like you guys to have plenty of time to do it. It should take quite a bit of effort, so I want you to have plenty of time to dig in and do it. Can I ask real quick before you all peace out, in terms of how difficult did you feel the midterm paper was on a scale of 1 to 10? I don't know. Like, was it like, oh my God, this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do for college? Or was it like, pretty easy? 6, okay. 7, reasonable, okay. Did you just give me a thumbs down? That's unacceptable. No, I'm just kidding, Cleo. Yeah. Okay. I'm like, no one's telling me it was like a
She was
10.
actually rating it a 1. It was super easy for her. That's what
Super
that was.
easy.
Yeah.
All right, I'll crank it up a little bit then. All right, I just wondered
Please
where it
God, no,
was.
no, no.
I'm shooting for a 9.5. Just, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. All right, I'm gonna let you go. Have a great night. Thank you all for a great discussion, and I'll see you next week.